This is GIMI think tank. As you know, we invite here speakers from diverse industries, diverse backgrounds, and the objectives are threefold always. The speakers are always either talking about trends that help us to imagine the future, or they're talking about innovation management, different frameworks, tools, and principles that are used around the world, or they're talking about different innovations that are happening in different industries, and they share here. And we bring these speakers with either in one of this area of expertise, and they talk here. And today we have a wonderful speaker here, Damarys Zampini. And let me share her bio so I quickly introduce her. Laura, can I share my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so there she is, Damarys. She is the president and founder of SU Strategy. She has been working with aspiring leaders who want to grow and drive disruptive innovations across different industries. And she helps them with the solutions, innovative solutions that can help them in their transformation journey, and also at the same time in their net zero journey. She has over 20 years of experience in diverse industries of energy, oil and gas, chemical, mining. In mining, she has across the value chain, exploration, pipelines, construction, fabrication, logistics, you name it, I think, and even in technologies. She has also a lot of experience across supply chain integration, whether it's third-party logistics or operational assessment and improvement in logistics as well as MRO. But the whole idea is using different practices like Six Sigma, lean applications, and maybe other things to eliminate waste along the business processes. And that has been her forte. And here she is. We are very excited to have you, Damarys. And I think with that, I'll leave the floor to you.
There we are. I should by now know how to operate a computer. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for being here today and listening to me. Whenever I present, and I was joking about it, this weekend I was invited to Sevilla to speak, and I said, my friends were like, "Oh, we're so proud of you." And I said, "Well, just tell my kids, like, if they could listen to me, then I'm winning, right?" So I'm very honored to be here. Very nice to meet everybody. Mucho gusto en conocerles, muito prazer, salam alaikum, and whoever else I missed, I apologize. But I am trilingual, and I am Latin American born, human being, child of the world. I went to Canada when I was very little, and I now actually kind of commute between Portugal and my home in Canada. So I see no barriers when it comes to where we're all from. In fact, I see a massive place for collaboration, and I'm very excited to have such an international audience here today. And so, with that, I wanted to get started. I do have a presentation that I'll use a little bit more of a guide. To be honest, I always say I never ever want to be the smartest person in the room. And if anything, I really want to learn from everybody and figure out ideas, right? Figure out how can we actually communicate with each other so that we can actually achieve something bigger and better. So if I may, I'm going to share my presentation. Just give me a second here. I think I'm able to share, yes? Yeah, I should be able to share. So just a second. Right.
While Damarys presents, if you guys have any questions, put it in the chat. So we'll take it in there.
Perfect. All right. And then I'm going to do. There we are. All right. So can everybody see my sharing screen?
Can see.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to present. Where's my present button? Slideshow. There we are. All right. So today's topic is resilient infrastructure with energy security. I'm going to actually again, use these as more of a guide. So this is me, and super happy to share my contact. I'm actually going through a whole rebranding process right now. So all of my logos are being updated, and you'll see my new website very, very soon. We're just working on final updates on it. So if you have gone to my sustrategy.com website recently, it's not up to date. It's actually quite archaic, but you will see some changes coming up here shortly. And so I guess, just a quick pause on who I am, and why some of my background can maybe matter to your world. I am, again, a Latin American born. I was born in El Salvador, lived in Costa Rica for a bit. We had civil war. I'm a landed, actually refugee into my home now, Canada. And the place where I really kind of, I say I don't like to grow up yet, but I kind of grew up, went to university, found my career, and have a lot of networks, in North America because of it. I was very lucky to actually work in the oil and gas, petrochemicals, and mining industries. Energy is really a common thread between all of us. We couldn't be doing this without it, for example, and many other survival aspects to energy. I have seen a lot of innovation be born. I am passionate about human ingenuity. I really truly think that we have every answer to every problem with technology. And so, the theme really will be today about, how do we integrate these things? And I'm very much, happy to honor those who are innovating on a daily basis. So most of my days are focused around strategy, which focuses on helping companies that are very innovative. They have a global out view of the world. So whether they want to grow global or stay regional, they need to have a consciousness about what that means in the world and where they want to grow. Maybe there's a competitor, in Malaysia that may come after my business in Bogota, for example. And so what does that mean for my market? So that has to have a global outlook. They must have a significant ROI for end user, as well as have an ROI for investors. So sometimes I am also an angel investor into some of these technologies. I have been for the last 10 years. And most companies that I work with, I will not work with them unless I myself can invest in them or I'm invested with them. And so they have to have a significant ROI for end user or investor. They must have within their DNA return on community. And that's very, very key part of the puzzle. None of us are here forever. I really am focused on working on legacy projects. So return on community can mean anything from, planting trees to actually providing access to people in order to enable them to share their ideas, right? Because every human's ideas are valid, for example. And last but not least, they have to be ready to grow, because I like to see these grow. I believe that we are doing the world a disservice if we don't actually enable people to understand what the solutions are out there, with technologies around the aspects of resiliency. So with that, I'm going to dive in. The purpose of today, of course, is really more to share over the last decade, beyond my oil and gas, petrochemicals and mining, supply chain management and infrastructure. I have really dove deep into vetting processes. Another aspect of my daily life, I actually sit on a fund. It's a Canadian registered fund, which is called Ignite. And what we do is we actually, our thesis is metric-driven impact in the areas of, what we would call today ESG. ESG is an interesting topic. I think that its origins are very pure. I think some of them have got distorted, and I think some of them have got diluted. But, regardless of that, we do need to care about, our humans, the social part, the environment, and of course, governance has a lot to do with the behavior of people in order to do that. So today's purpose and topic really is to share some of my experiences, some of that deep dive into vetting these technologies, as well as some of the actual ecosystem involvement and some of the actual technologies that I've put together and we are now growing and scaling globally. And by the way, honestly, please stop me or send a chat question. I'm happy to pause at any given point. And then if you come up with something later on after we leave here today, please reach out to me. I am happy to collaborate. Like I said, two brains are always better than one. So next. So here are some of the key points that we'll go over today. The definition of what is resiliency. Energy at our core, without energy, like I said, there's a lot of things that can't happen. And we ought to be grateful for that, but we ought to, not just criticize for the sake of, bad oil and gas, and oh my God, look at renewables. I actually, I'm very involved in the ecosystem still in Calgary, even though I commute back to Canada from Portugal. I sit on a couple of different advisory boards, and I also was one of the co-founders of Calgary Women in Energy, which is a great standing group today, and one of the biggest in Canada and North America, actually, that does a lot around education of all energy and other aspects. But I also proudly put together the Youth and Energy program, The Future of Energy, which we delivered at the Global Energy Show, which again talks about the resiliency of human and really the evolution of all energies, including oil and gas, including LNG, including solar. We even added levels of around AI. We added other aspects around, integrated solar, regular solar, wind, nuclear. And so all of these were to say that, no offense to us, I mean, I tell my kids my age is forever 27, which is not, but really the future of energy belongs to the next generation. And so my goal there was actually to bring everybody and kids to actually lean in, to think and break it. Let's break things. Let's break how it was, not just for the sake of breaking it, but for coming up with new solutions, ultimately to make it better. And then the why, and why aren't we there yet? And that's back relating to resiliency and resilient infrastructure, buildings, roads. I mean, why is it that, we still have a natural event happen and buildings collapse, right? So how can we do better around those areas? And then how do we move the needle? Like who needs to do that? And how do we do that? And then always continuous improvement. So the word resiliency, as you look it up on various different dictionaries, is an ability to recover or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So change, as we know, is inevitable. I mean, hello, powerful humans here. We all just survived a whole pandemic, right? And here we are resilient as resilient can be. And so, but resiliency is a part of a cycle, right? So that part of a cycle is, how do we adapt? Because at some point we all are vulnerable. It's a matter of when, not if. And so I think that, my bottom comment there is, let's get back to the basics. These are the basics. We know that. We know we're resilient. And we don't want to have to innovate when we have to be pushed to it. So, change is hard for a lot of humans, most of us. But should we really have to be forced into that position before we actually make a decision? And so that is, something that, if I may ask everybody to take away, is, let's not get put in a corner, right, for us to react, because I feel that industry, governments, municipalities, people in our own ways are vulnerable, and then we are made to react. And I think that by reacting, sometimes there's some cool ideas come out of reacting, but if we can plan a little bit ahead of that, I think we're doing ourselves a big favor. So how do we plan to make sure that we have an actionable plan? I mean, no offense to Deloitte's and PwC's and KPMG's, they're amazing companies. They do incredible work, but we don't really need a Bible or an encyclopedia of a strategy. We need to figure out a way to quickly action and move forward when we are actually in a point of vulnerability. And that relates to our cities, our municipalities, even our own homes. So next, I talk a little bit here with regards to our world, right? So is our world actually resilient? We're resilient as humans. And so this is a quick reference from one of the studies that we've done, and there's a bunch of reference points at the bottom of this presentation, which I'm happy to share afterwards as well. But really, when we look at what really is a resilient infrastructure or resilient countries, there's a lot around, smart cities. And I attend, over the last 6-7 years, a lot of different smart cities, conferences, energy conferences related to infrastructure, construction, events, and the like, right? So I learn as much as I can at each and every one of them, but really some of these are the key factors from an actual infrastructure perspective. So we've got your green infrastructure with urban forests, parks, trees, living walls, green roofs, sport fields, agriculture. How do we decentralize? How do we get better? I grew up actually just outside of Calgary, south of Calgary, a city called Lethbridge, Alberta. So I call it LA, Lethbridge, Alberta. It sounded cool back in the day, in my high school days. And then I moved to Calgary, but the prairies, Canadian prairies. I mean, we have a lot of agriculture, and it's amazing because my sister actually married a farmer, and so thus they have a big farm. And I always think, as my nephew grew up and he's now an adult, I go, is agriculture something you want to do? And most of them kind of grow out of that and they want to do something else like finance or banking or other things. And I get it, but I go, okay, well, fundamentally we need this agriculture for all of us to be fed. And so that's a big theme across, all of these ESG goals that are stated by the UN, for example. Blue infrastructure, water. So water is very important, right? We're funny, we're humans, right? Because we focus on energy and mining. And I mean, okay, I say that as I'm wearing a beautiful silver necklace and it's a luxury, really it is. But, we're mining for these things, but we don't have no clue of our own water security. I was lucky to work on a water infrastructure project in Panama, where we were looking at the actual water for the next 50 to 100 years with a group called Catalac, actually, an interesting group in the area. And some of our Canadian technology around taking a look at subterranean and deep subterranean water and really connecting that to surface water, rainwater, and any type of water in between. So, it's amazing to me still how countries can focus so much on oil reserves, which is great, and of course it's a business, but we die without water. So, these again are connected dots. And again, in some areas of the world, if we don't have energy, we can't extract the water. So they go very much hand in hand. And then we have the gray infrastructure. So buildings, roads, and drains, and everything that connects all of these actual gray infrastructure. And when it comes to that gray infrastructure, it's probably been from my experience, one of the most stuck in their ways industries. Because it's easy, and we humans, I mean, who doesn't love easy? And so I think that in a way we really want to stay with what we know best, and of course, again, that's easy, but let's make sure that if there is a good idea there, let's try it, let's implement it, let's make it better, right? I work with a handful of companies actually right out of Calgary, that in Western Canada, that are innovating. I joke, right? So if anybody, I know that we have a local Calgarian here, but if others have been to Calgary or Alberta, we have cold temperatures. And so I say, it's cold winters, man. We invent a lot of things. And so as great as that is, we do invent a lot of things. But the reality is we have green building infrastructure that actually has resilient walls. So an example of that I'll give is some of my good friends at CGen. Actually a company that started, we used to be office mates in an office building downtown Calgary. They started their building around noise solutions. It's the business name. And noise solutions actually provided a solution for oil and gas industrial applications, which have a mandate to make sure that the R value of these buildings, so that there is no disruption around temperature and noise, and that the people around it were not going to have hearing damage. And so they would contain these compressor stations, for example, in a building, in an infrastructure where it would actually mitigate that noise coming out and therefore hurting the people. And so this technology, by the way, now is not just for oil and gas. Of course, it is still for oil and gas in industrial applications, but it actually has now come out into industry agnostic applications such as housing, other buildings. We're actually looking at a project now here in Europe where they're looking to build a huge, massive complex. I think it's about 42 hectares. And some of the big, massive buildings need to have a soundproof roofs, right? So it's interesting how some of these evolutions happen from one industry to another. And then the last, but I think most important, at the end of the day, even if we all ended up, living under a rock or in a little hut, we do need to have that social interaction, that economic, how do we actually trade with each other, right? And this is actually where I think technologies such as digital technologies can come in, which, barter and trade type of technologies. And how do we define value? So I think some of these technologies have come to really disrupt how we deal with each other. But more importantly and foundationally, because let's think about the resiliency part. Okay, cryptocurrencies and blockchain have an incredible amount of application. But if data centers are dead, if there is no infrastructure, if there is no Wi-Fi, which of course in our new world, we can't imagine that because it's so handy, right? We can't live without our devices, God forbid. But think about what those things have done. I mean, as far as I see it, it's actually brought us back to the days when we used to trade for one another. I think of my ancestors in, both Latin America and Spain. And I think, well, we traded coffee for fruit, and then maybe fruit for babysitting, or we just really, it was a village collaboration. So I think that, ecosystems, as we call them today, are kind of a resemblance of some of those aspects of our ancestry, but maybe in a new way. So just a little quick view on what the resiliency is that we need to look at here. So let's move on to the next one. All right. So again, energy at its core, I just put 4 points here: facts, future of energy, I spoke about earlier, when God gives us lemons, and then rethink, and then decentralize. So some of these sources here, and again, those links, are shared at the bottom of this presentation. So if we take a look at who uses energy, we use a lot of energy. And this humanity today uses the most energy out of any humanity ever before us. But still today, we are using the majority. So if you look at there, we're over 80% really of oil and gas related, coal related consumption. And that's what we use because our infrastructure has offered us that today. Now, oil and gas has got better too, right? Like, I think about 20 years ago, even when I started, over 20 years ago, I'm getting old, but forever 27, if my kids ask. Really, infrastructure has changed, technology has changed, solar has changed. What we're doing now with solar, we couldn't have thought about that 10 years ago. No way. Maybe somebody thought about it, but we're actually doing today is incredible. The future of energy, I talked, the definition as I see it as the future of energy is a mix of energy. And it's a mix of energy that will have something to do with a very natural way of how we create, consume, recycle, and reuse that energy. So I don't know what that answer ultimately is, but I think we're working on it today. And I think that we need to be able to question those things at every level. But until we get there, I mean, we still need oil. So that's just the reality of it. And then when God gives us lemons, right? So with the Future of Energy program, this was a big message with my kids, and they were anywhere between 10 and 17. And they were so smart, by the way. They like broke me when they asked me some questions that I couldn't answer. But what I said to them was, when God gives us lemons, I'm right now in the Algarve in Portugal, one of the sunniest places in all of Europe, actually. So I sit there and I go, there is no reason why anybody should even be paying for the grid today. And I mean, okay, the grid operators might kill me for me saying that, because of course they want to make sure that their business is still intact. But the reality is we need to rethink these systems because grids are already overwhelmed. As I said before, we can't live without our computing power, and computing power takes a lot of energy. Again, another example, that's one of the projects that I work with some other partners. which is actually taking a look at a huge portfolio. It's over 7 gigawatts of power globally that are available for, things like data center relocation and cryptocurrency operations. And these are anywhere from natural gas to solar and otherwise. But the reality is here, solar makes complete sense. And actually, it was years ago, it was about 6 years ago, Portugal was able to go 4 full days without grid, technically. And so great, amazing. Let's continue to do that. Northern Alberta, that's not going to fly in the wintertime when we have this much snow. It isn't going to fly. Solar isn't going to happen. And so what is the alternative, right? And so I think about this again, when God gives us lemons, God gave, Northern Alberta a lot of other resources, including oil, for example, which literally used to float down the rivers. And our Indigenous people used to utilize to actually coat their canoes so that they could float down the river easier. So these are the resources that we need to think about. How do we actually utilize them best? We still don't have solutions, for example, for full recycling of solar. If we do, I'm looking at all of those things anytime. So please come to me with any of those solutions. But when God gives us lemons, we don't make wine. I love my wine and I wish I could make wine from lemons, but I also love lemonade. And so we need to make sure that we take a look at how do we integrate to our environment to make it the best that we can be and be most responsible as possible. And then rethink grids, right? Because my personal next project will be to build a home that is fully off grid if I need to be, right? I will have access to grid because I like to have it if I possibly can. But if I don't, then I would like to figure out a way to be completely off grid, just because I don't want to prove it to anybody. I want to prove it to myself that I can do it. And I also want to figure out water collection systems, because again, we don't live without water. So, when I think about disruption, I think we can take some of these matters into our own hands. I have a good friend of mine actually out of Calgary who's just been doing that himself. Amit, and he's actually been doing that in his own home by integrating some of the solar out of Calgary. Calgary, by the way, is the sunniest big city in Canada. There's other smaller cities that are also very sunny, but here's the things that we can do within our own control, and what can we implement at a greater level in our corporate world and otherwise. So this was just a little quick continuation with the lemons. This is the Amalfi Coast. If you guys have been to the Amalfi Coast, it's incredible. There's a lot of lemons there. But, again, this is a place where they don't have the luxury of big fields to put a big solar farm in. So what do we do, right? I'll have an answer to that for you guys in a minute. But again, this is just the reality of things. This is what we're using today for energy consumption. And so we need to make sure that, Europe, again, because of the war, over the winter time, I was hearing things like there will be disruption, there will be blackouts. So I don't know how many of you have experienced blackouts, but I did as a very young girl all the time. And I remember thinking when there was a war, there was civil war and there was a bomb, and then I'd be like, oh, I don't have to do my homework today. Until my mom figured out, she's like, well, no, here's your candle and go do your homework. But blackouts are very real. And in some places, when a blackout also means not just we don't have electricity and we don't have light, but we can't make a warm meal and we can't keep warm. In places like Northern Europe, people will die. So we need to figure out ways of resiliency around that, right? I'm not going to build a big coal plant for myself, right? I have enough friends that I could probably build myself an oil well if I was in the right place that actually has oil. But what else can I do, right? To in order to be sure that I'm going to have some of that resiliency. And so why, right? Why should we think about these things? Like, why should I give a crap? Well, because shit happens, pardon my Spanish, and it does. And we can't control the weather, okay? Yes, of course, folks will say about, oh, Intrinsic came up. Well, I sit on an advisory for Intrinsic. I did a presentation for them, so I apologize for that. In any case, we think about carbon output. Of course, it's very important. Listen, I tell my kids this story. I say, we want to be a good tenant, right? We have a rental property, and we've had renters that were not very clean, and we brought them to the house and we showed them what a mess they left. And so, I kind of refer to that moment and I go, none of us are here forever. We're tenants to this planet. So when we leave, do you want to be that guy that really just left a disgusting place and you will never have them back? Like, if I want to come back to Earth, I want to be back and I want to be welcome. So let's do our best we can. So, but at the end of the day, we really can't control the weather. The weather has been changing before humans even arrived, and it will continue to change after humans are gone. So there's our contribution. We want to make sure that we're good tenants. In the meantime, we have to look at better ways. I mean, again, there are so many smart people out there that I'm so grateful every single day to be working with, because they've invented amazing and genius solutions to some of these problems. I was just talking to one gentleman earlier today, Don, who has a fire innovation. They have a very simple technology that will spray out over 200 meters on top of a canopy of any given fire. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. We don't need innovation to be complex and super scientific that nobody can decipher it. Innovation can be something very simple, as long as it is applicable, understood, and we're able to actually implement it. So we need to be able to do this. And then again, why? Because we have to. It's our responsibility. It's our duty. Okay, not everybody has kids, but I do, and I don't want to be leaving them, and I don't want them to be embarrassed of my non-contribution. I want them to be proud of at least something I did to make this thing a little bit better than it was before. And so this one's just a quick guide to barriers, right? Like, there's a lot of barriers, and I deal with barriers on a daily for my clients and even for myself. Governments are there, great. I believe in government. I believe in paying tax. I believe there's a really great use case for that. We're always arguing about which was the right one. I still think AI probably will be the right government, but whatever, we're getting there. We're on our way. I believe policies are great, because ultimately we really only change behavior if we are penalized. So what do I have to lose? Like, if I don't change behavior, what are you going to penalize me for? Right? Like, what's the charge? And then if I do switch behavior, what's my reward? Like, what's in it for me? Right? So, governments, policies are great because they can drive a lot of great change in behavior. And once policy moves, things move really quickly. An example of that is in Vancouver, right? British Columbia, Canada. I was there just right after COVID was ending. I was there for both business and family visit. And then I came back about 6 months later. The first time I came post-COVID, there was maybe 1 EV per every 9 vehicles on the road. 6 months later, every 6th vehicle was a Tesla. And so I was like, what just happened here? But it was policy. It was incentives. It was incentivizing people to do this, right? So it's interesting how these things, can shift what happens. But the other part of all of this is also ego, right? Did I screw up? Or maybe I shouldn't let this in because I'm going to now have to reinvent. So all of these things can be barriers, but the reality is we cannot wait and we must innovate. Just going to check the chat here. All right. If I have any questions, please raise your hand and I'll see that raise hand. All right. As I mentioned earlier, my website is just being redone, and I'm happy to share a lot more post this presentation. But there are various ways, right? So when it comes to resilient infrastructure, there's a lot of ways that we can start to integrate and actually make this a reality versus just some goal and dream. And some of these are within our wheelhouse of strategy, and that is around water security, building materials. Again, happy to make some introductions there to those folks. They're incredible at what they're doing. Integrated solar, and I'll talk about that in a second. I have an example that I wanted to showcase. Carbon credits. Listen, whether you believe in this or not, I see so many different arguments against this. And I think it is policy that's definitely driving it. But at the end of the day, I think it's the how you approach some of these projects. An example of that is actually a project we're involved in directly, which has to do actually with some mangroves in Colombia. And I know we have some Colombians here, mangroves in Colombia as well as Ecuador. And we're wanting to protect these ecosystems. And our biggest goal there is to, yes, we will make sure that, we actually have direct access, by the way, by the indigenous groups locally, which takes a lot of trust capital. My partner is Colombian in this venture. And but one of our biggest goals there is the bigger we go, the more we actually contribute back directly to the ecosystem to make sure that there's healthy ecosystems to be able to do this. We also work with cement nanotechnology for infrastructure, existing and new technology or new infrastructure pores. Literally technology that you can spray upwards, and it's actually been done, and it will seek to fulfill any cracks into the matrix of this cement infrastructures to give it an extra 20 years of life. So from an environmental perspective, cement is the third biggest polluter on the planet. And we continue to use it. But how do we, mitigate not having to, because eventually when it dies, you have to rip it out and it goes to garbage. So in this case, we elongate this life, therefore having a direct environmental impact. But, the product itself is, you can drink it. It's completely safe. And also, you're able to now, if you think about it from a real estate, commercialization, you have an extra 20 years on that asset. I talked a little bit about water security, some of the building materials. Again, we've got some friends in Calgary, for example, that have built magnesium oxide boards that are very resilient, fireproof, and they're incredible ways to build both commercial and residential buildings. Mobility. Again, there's a whole aspect of electrification. I believe that all of mobility is changing right in front of our eyes today. It's not going to be overnight, and even battery technologies will change substantially over the next 5 years. But we need to go through this change, right? And these waves. And so what can we do to reinvent, to challenge, and not for the sake of challenging, but for the sake of coming up with solutions? And then smart city, around digital and non-digital aspects. One example I like to bring up is, cities have until now been built by men for men. And that's fine. I mean, men have, really taken a lot of work, and I'm grateful for it, to build with their hands, right? And now, of course, things are becoming more automated. But, an example of that is, you go to an arena for a hockey game or a football game, and you go to the washroom, you see the girls' lineup is about 17 kilometers long, but the men's is not. People can go in and out very easily. Because at one point, whoever designed that, usually a male, said, well, we'll have equal spaces, right? And so, but of course, women are different. We menstruate, we nurse children, we have makeup, we have other needs. And so therefore, we need to have different spaces. And so these are, the smart cities, as I define them, will have these rooms for all of us to be able to be honored in the things that we need to do, and in the ways that we need to live and honor each other. Oh, so this was one of the examples I really wanted to bring up, and it's one of our portfolio companies, both from an investment perspective, but also from a client perspective. So I'm going to switch this on really quickly. And again, this is just a quick video. Can everybody see the video okay? Can't see anybody, but I'm okay.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet?
Mm-mm.
Can you
You
see
may
it now?
want to share your screen rather than the document.
You're sharing the document, I guess. I don't know. You only see the document.
Okay, let's go here.
Now we can see it.
Okay, now we can see it now.
Perfect. Okay, so this is actually a technology that and technology integration. This company is called Solar Earth. It's a Canadian technology. And what it is, it's actually called PIPV, which is pavement integrated photovoltaic. So instead of taking up, potentially valuable land, we actually integrate into urbanized hardscapes. And so in this case here, what we're doing is we are integrating into a parking lot. So this is what the panels actually look like. And in this case, they wanted to actually replace their existing infrastructure. We can go right on existing infrastructure. We can also go on plastic substrate, depending on what its use is. In this case, we chose cement because it actually is going to have a different application, as you will see. This is actually an electric vehicle charger that they were installing there. This is, of course, our inverter and control systems that are necessary. And so now this is actually a parking lot, which has the vehicle driving on top of it. It's capturing the sun all day long. And then he backs into his stall. This is an electric vehicle charger. That day we charged 3 vehicles when I was there and we unveiled this project. It was funny because everybody was, you know, when we opened it and we said, okay, come on, you can walk on it. And everybody was quite hesitant because of course we don't walk on traditional solar because it breaks. But that, you know, that was just a little bit to show an example of, oh, let me go back and share the rest of the presentation here. That was just a little bit of example of integrating 2 technologies. In this case, it's PIPV, solar into hardscapes, and integrating it with electric vehicle chargers. We've now actually done other integrations, such as integrating it with water from air. So it's actually a technology that pulls water from the air and provides potable drinking water. And so you're technically drinking water from the air powered by the sun. So, you know, these are some of the integrations that can happen. And so it's kind of rethinking solar. Not, you know, again, traditional solar is great. It's doing some great purposes, but in this case, you're now installing into urbanized areas where have already been constructed and have already been utilized for a purpose and could be, you know, walkways, pathways, etc. So I wanted to point some of that. And then really, that's it for me. I think I'm coming up on time. Maybe I took a little bit extra time. I'm passionate about all of these things. And I think that we can all do amazing things together. Really, the conclusion is what is in your control? Let's think about that. What are the next steps that you're going to actually take in your work and your personal life? And how will you become the resistance of no, right? Because no's are out there and it's okay. The no's just make us even more resilient and stronger and better. And really, what's your why, right? What is your why? Why are you doing this? Why should we care? And I think that once you're able to fuel that foundation, we're really able to, you know, put on a plank like I have here on my feet in this picture and really conquer mountains. Because we've done it before and we can do it going forward. So that's it for me. I'm happy to have any questions. Here's my contact information and some of the reference points that I stated. Please feel free to contact, call, email, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram. Actually, I deleted my Telegram. I was told a week ago that I have to reinstall my Telegram. But I'm in most areas where you can find me. And my goal is to be a good tenant. And I hope that I have inspired you to be a good tenant as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Damarys. That was indeed an inspirational and insightful talk. Thank you for that. I think I'll open up for Q&A, questions, comments from the audience. Please feel free. Oh, there's Dr. Bob. Go ahead, Dr. Bob.
Hi, so I'm in Calgary. You can see the skyline behind me there. You'll recognize a lot of the buildings. I came across your name a few times, but we've never actually met in person. And so I checked and we have 168 people in common through LinkedIn. So so you could just, if you put in Dr. Bob Haskane Calgary, my email will come up. So I'd love to connect up with you and see what our dots are doing. I'm on the global board for GIMI. And so it's a bit of a surprise when we have a speaker comes in kind of in my neighborhood and I kind of say, okay, well, there's lots of things that are happening. My close colleague, Phil Davidson is also on the call. Phil, we put your hand up there. Maybe you can have a few comments as well. His office is about 12 feet from mine. He actually is one of my undergraduate master's students. So he's the heir apparent to all the connections that we have. There's a lot of things that we can do if we collaborate together. So I'd be happy to do that.
I'm so sad that I missed you. I was just in Calgary. I just came back a few days ago. So I'm coming back for sure for the Global Energy Show. So I hope to meet you then. And absolutely, you know, as you know, of course, firsthand, we create a lot of things, but I do think that we're doing the world a disfavor if we're not actually displaying them on the global stage for everybody to be able to, you know, make it better and implement it, right? So we, yeah, happy definitely to continue to connect and figure out ways to co-create.
Thanks, Dr. Bob. Okay, any other questions, comments from anyone else?
You have a question in the chat, Rohan, from Daniel. Hi.
Okay, Daniel, okay. How do we get better involvement and diversity in city design, particularly for design at night for women and other groups?
Sorry, design at night. What was the last part?
Design at night for women and other groups. So how do you make it safer for women and design a city for better involvement and diversity?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And actually, you know, speaking of how cities have been built till today, and sadly, it's actually close to 70% of the world population of women that actually does not feel safe walking at night still. So that's not okay, right? I mean, you know, we've all got mothers, for sure. We've all got mothers and we've all got, you know, maybe sisters, aunts and daughters and nieces and so on. And I want them to walk, you know, safely at night. And, you know, listen, there's some great places like Dubai, for example, where this happens. And so thank God for that. But there's a lot of places where not. I mean, I actually was mugged in broad daylight, downtown Calgary. And my daughter told me, she goes, Mom, you were mugged. I hadn't even told her the story, but she Googled my name probably about a year ago, and it actually comes up. And it came up because I used to sit on the safety committee for Flint Energy, which was one of the biggest employers in Western Canada for about 10 years. And so I was mugged broad daylight. I actually was going from a client meeting back to the office. And right at the Bay Parkade, as it was called back then, across the street from Bow Valley building, as my fellow Calgarians will know, I was mugged. And so I communicated all of it to all of my networks and, you know, via email, of course. Back in the day, we didn't have too many other accessible things. This was probably, well, it was actually the years before she was born. She turns 14 tomorrow. So it was about 15 years ago today. And that was not okay. It really bothered me because I thought, you know, it's really, really sad that in my own city, which I consider my home, you know, this happened. So there are solutions, there are technologies out there, actually, including, you know, the solar integrated into the floor. We actually have lighting capabilities where the floor actually lights up. But there's also other capabilities and partnerships that we're looking at right now, including another Canadian company called BusPass, which has, you know, light posts that are smart light posts that are fully connected. We also connect with our Solar Earth telecommunication towers. And so all of this is really to be able to communicate, you know, and be able to have safe places where they're actually monitored via camera. And there's a way to have an SOS contact. There's also other technologies that are integrated into the hardware that are actually going to be enable you to have different types of signaling so that you know, for example, if you're able to use your mobile, you're able to do that from your own mobile. But if your phone dies, which they do, you're able to actually communicate via an SOS switch or a button in a community that has these capabilities of connectivity and be able to alert people. So, you know, there's also another company out of Portugal, actually, that's called OmniFlow. They offer smart lighting posts. So they're just regular street light, but have full capability of SOS and also sensor technology. They even have sensor technology. So say, for example, you're at an intersection and, you know, there's an elderly person that's walking quite slowly and it can measure based on their speed, or a child that's going on a bicycle and they're going really fast. And then there's a vehicle that's approaching. So it will actually alert with light, or it can also alert with noise. So there are technologies out there. And again, it's a matter of integrating and actually making these happen from a municipality perspective. I think we need to push the buttons, because I think it's, even if you do one, because oftentimes it is monkey see, monkey do, right? So, one intersection implements this type of solution. And then I would want that in my intersection where I know my daughter is going to cross the street, for example, or even in university campuses. And actually, we are working with University of Calgary. We have 2 projects right now with both University of Calgary's engineering school, as well as with the Haskayne group of business. The business group actually just did their presentation, did an incredible job of the application of solar earth, and we're looking at other projects there as well. So there are ways to do it. I think what I would love for everybody to take away is, how do we push our municipalities to actually implement it?
Thank you, Damarys. We have another question from Phil. I mean, it's not a question, but he is asking, what's the intended market for fire suspension system you mentioned?
EU is very focused on funding, and I'm just connecting him. Actually, that's why we were talking. So they actually have deployments already in Canada, but they have now 4 different countries that they're going to be implementing here in Europe. So I'm happy to connect you with Don. He's fantastic. He enables us to be prepared, and he's got a very simple solution. So the markets so far have been Canada, mostly going into Europe, and they're really looking, of course, at California, because as we know, California fires have been horrible and devastating over the last couple of decades, really, that I know of. And also British Columbia, Canada. The town of Lytton completely burnt down to the ground. And we're actually going to be working with those guys to try and do some rebuild around resiliency of that infrastructure. So I'm happy to connect you directly with Don.
Thank you, Damarys. Maybe okay, this is Crisanto. I'll ask after you. Go ahead, Crisanto. You're mute.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Crisanto.
Hello, thank you, Damarys. Glad to listen to you, because I'm sure you are an optimist, and we are all people are resilient, right? But your message is, don't wait until you got into a vulnerable situation. So plan something about it and act on it. Okay, fine. But in real life, we also have fellows who are not that optimistic like you are, right? So here's the thing that I'd like to have your comment. One is on the vulnerability. One is, as you mentioned, climate change. We are talking about energy transition to renewables, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the statistics, we haven't moved that far. And even actually in Indonesia enjoy the bonanza of coal, because everybody buying coal from us because of Ukrainian war, okay? So if you look at the resilience and sustainability, we are going backward actually. But I cannot counter the argument that what's wrong with that? We make a lot of money, and then we need the money for doing something good, but at least temporarily we are doing okay, yeah, because of the Ukrainian war, and then we are going backwards from the renewables movement. Secondly, I just listened to somebody from US talking about some CIA agent, former CIA agent, talking about the risk of Ukrainian war. He said that it's very possible that we'll go into vulnerability for the whole world, because one of the president, either it is Joe Biden or Putin, pushed the nuclear button, okay? And then it's not for them only. If that happens and there is an exchange of nuclear weapons, the whole world, or even 10 times of the world, will be all destroyed. Okay, so how can you address that, being an optimist, that we can do something about that so that we are proven to be resilient? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I agree. And of course, there's always going to be naysayers. And listen, I can tell you, I'm vulnerable right now. And I'm in Europe, right? So I'm closer to the action than I would be if I was in Calgary, if they hit that button of nuclear, which can be possible, right? So and so I think that I hear two questions. One of them is, there's the incumbent, and there is the necessity of, hey, if we're going to make money with this thing now, let's do it. And we're also going to power our homes. And by the way, we're also going to even power other countries' homes. So we're doing a good thing with coal, right? And I go back to my point of when God gives us lemons, right? And so unfortunately, for places like the Ukraine, they were cut off. They don't have natural gas from Russia coming in. They have other resources. And eventually they will reinvent themselves to be less vulnerable. But that takes time. And so that goes back to my point of, this is why we can't wait for governments, why we can't wait for policies and all of these things. Okay, I'm not saying go against the law, but I'm saying, if I really want to drink my own Kool-Aid, I'm going to build a home that is actually at least going to have a minimum 4 days of power resiliency, where I'm going to be able to cook for my kids and be able to have heat at night and be able to be protected. So that's at the individual level, right? Or, that's a minimum for survival. But ideally, we're able to take a look at, another technology that I work with, that's actually a Japanese technology, now with a Canadian subsidiary, that has vehicle to grid technology. So it's the first only really fully biodirectional current that is able to take, an electric vehicle or really itself as a power source that can either put back into the grid or pull from the grid. And it's already worked, by the way, for more than 10 years. And it has worked in cases like tsunamis in Japan and other major events. When we talk blackout, we mean blackout. We mean there is no power. Maybe the hospital has some backup generators, but those only go such long ways. And gas stations are not working. Okay, so you have no gas, you're screwed. You have nothing. So, these are some of the technologies that are really out there. And here's another example. Actually, going back to the solar earth, we actually installed in Florida a whole pathway, which has now survived 4 hurricanes. And so that is incredible, because even on the last hurricane, which was just last year, we measured that it was still, even during the storm, okay, it was raining, so there was no sunshine, but the daylight, the light of the daylight was still giving enough power so that we were, in this case, we're actually powering an intersection, like, semaphoros, like red, yellow, green. It was, I think, 1 out of 161 intersections, the only one that was actually operating. And so, okay, that's maybe not life or death, but that is a critical municipal service from an infrastructure perspective. So does that answer all the questions? No, but here are some examples where we can implement some of these things, because the reality is, yeah, listen, oil and gas, I worked, before strategy was born, I worked in oil and gas, and we saw the cycles, right? We have, we even have bumper stickers in our cars going, please God, bring us another wave so that, we're not going to blow our money this time, because people made a lot of money and then the industry went down and people got laid off, right? And so it was this roller coaster of industry that were very rich, and then we were freaking out, and then we were rich again, and then freaking out again, and, very reactive. And it's stressful, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of mental issues because of all of this. Even as far as suicide. So from the human perspective, I think that we need to be thinking through these, ups and downs, because yes, of course, we want to make money and have fancy things and fun things or whatever. But, to me, the new rich really is having quality time with the people that I want to enjoy and spend time with them, feeling free, feeling at peace. And so, definition of success and happiness is different for everybody. But, to be able to withstand the storm, to be able to withstand a nuclear war, I mean, that's very serious stuff. And there is a possibility for it. So, looking at, military grade walls, right? I know another technology out of California, actually, which has integrated solar into glass, which actually is military grade into glass. So actually literally makes your windows bulletproof. So, okay, I'm not saying we need to stress out every day and think that mayhem is coming and somebody's going to come and shoot our windows. But how can we prepare as much as we can? The inevitable will happen. When it's our day, it's our day. But if we can invent things to integrate them and make sure that they work and make them better and better, I think that is our job fundamentally to do. And so that we're able to have that resiliency no matter what. And again, none of us are here forever, but in the meantime, let's do some cool integrations.
So at least we have to do something at our individual level, right? Don't wait for the policies to change.
No, we need to drive policies, I think, a little bit more.
Thank you, President. I had a question earlier, Damarys, regarding, you mentioned that you also help individuals on return on community. How exactly you calculate return on community? I mean, you talked about some metrics you're doing with in Calgary, but how exactly you do that?
Into which, sorry?
Return on community. You said return on investment and return on community.
Right, so return on community, great question. So, examples of these are, I mentioned our carbon credit project that we're doing. So what we're doing there is we have over 1 million hectares of mangroves in the jungle in Colombia and in Ecuador. And we literally have the indigenous have signed, the community and the landowners have signed us the right to those carbon credits. Now, that's an interesting project because most of us, really here on this call can't just walk in and go negotiate that. My partner has deep vetting and deep trust capital with these people. I mean, you literally have to fly there near El Choco, which Colombians will know. And then you actually have to get on a car and drive, and then you get on a boat and go down, the water and get there. It's not easy, okay? And so people have tried, and they've had a couple of European groups, unfortunately, come and offer all kinds of things around, hey, give us your carbon, assign us your carbon credits ownership, and we'll give you this and this and that, right? And they haven't, right? So they've really tried to kind of exploit for the sake of making themselves money. In our case, our covenant and our promise there is that we will give at least 15% of anything that we ever make back to the community, along with direct access to any type of educational programs, and making sure that this jungle does the same way. So that is one example of how we do this. Another example is actually a good friend of mine, Steve. We're just working on how we're actually going to be collaborating with each other right now. He's built a company called Seed Homes. It's right out of Calgary, actually. If anybody's there, can go check him out. He's one of my dear friends, Steve. And his target audience actually is 25 to 35-year-olds and then 55-plus-year-olds. And so he's built these almost modular homes, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom configuration, so that the younger generation who in Canada, especially, like Vancouver, Toronto, for example, people cannot afford to buy home. And so in this case, if you're a young person wanting to get into the market, $200,000 actually can get you a beautiful home that is very livable. And then if you are, an older couple, for example, that really are ready to get into retirement and don't want to have a huge piece of real estate where you have to, clean the snow and mow your lawn and all of that kind of stuff, and you maybe want to travel, then it's for these types of people. Now, for every 20 homes that they sell, they actually donate one to, a community in need, etc. So that's amazing, right? Like, he doesn't have to do that. Right. So that is an example of how, when I go to invest in companies, whether it's, as an angel investor from our fund or otherwise, even with time, I want to be sure that I have that alignment of that need of leaving the world a better place, being a better tenant, and providing people either access or something better that I'm going to feel good about it at the end of the day. Because there's ways to make money, but then there's ways to make money with a sizzle, with a, that was awesome kind of feeling. So those are some of the examples on how we measure different companies and what they're giving back.
These are great examples. Your examples just talk about your experience.
I'm getting old.
I think one other one I had when I was looking at your infrastructure planning framework, I don't know, it was a framework or there's especially in populous countries like India, Indonesia, China, we don't have the land surplus. So when infrastructure planning happens, there's a lot of focus on the gray and the human infrastructure, right? Not so much on the green one, because this is often neglected. So what would your suggestion or from your experience would be when they do such infrastructure planning for smart cities, especially in populous countries like us? What would you want them to do? What are the measures being taken?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things actually that right off the top of my head come out as a possible answer. They're not the holistic answer, of course, and we need to challenge ourselves in making better answers. But I know in India, for example, you guys have a terrible issue with your air quality, and also in China, different big cities in China.
Yep.
We're actually looking at a project in Singapore right now. It's a huge mall and a whole complex. Singapore is actually quite dense in population. Of course, they don't have the luxury of green spaces even, right? So, this is where traditional solar doesn't fit because, they just don't have the space, right? That space is valuable real estate space. So you don't have that. And so how do we take bike paths, sidewalks, and turn them into really actually money generating assets, but also clean energy generating assets? The other aspect is actually building with greenery as a facade. And we also have BIPV, so building integrated photovoltaic. One of them I mentioned before is actually glass integrated photovoltaic. And then the other one is right onto the facade of the wall of the building. Of course, you would put that on the sunny side of the building. And so it's just really capturing as much sun as possible, right? In order to have less infrastructure for pipelines and other things to bring you the power, whether it's from coal, natural gas, or otherwise. But there's another aspect that's being done more and more, especially in Asia. And actually, I'm lucky to be arm's length involved in a project called Amagaya, actually, that is an American company that's going to be building micro cities. And a lot of their intention in their build is facades with green. So it's greenery, right? As much plant life as possible on the facade and on the sides of buildings and on top of the buildings. So I think that all of these are some of the solutions that are already ready to be implemented. Even taking a look at, vertical farming, for example, how do we make those micro enough so that, instead of having one big one somewhere, maybe we can have a couple of smaller ones in a small community, for example, and then even just green space out in between buildings that we can use for actually, growing food and otherwise. So there are some solutions that I think are going to hopefully become more popular in order to clean our airs and be able to give us what we need for our substance and food, for example.
Thanks a lot. Okay, if you guys have any other questions, otherwise I think that was really fantastic. And we much appreciate your time, Damarys, today. I know we almost took more than the time assigned, but thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we're all able to connect and do something cool.
Yes, I'm going to connect with you, especially for the Solar Earth. It's very intriguing. And I'll connect with you on LinkedIn.
Sounds good, everybody. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Damarys.